In the spirit of reconciliation, Yellow Ladybugs acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today.
So, as an autistic individual, how was the COVID lockdown for me? The first time that gyms closed, I burst into absolute tears. I took a long time to calm down. And why was this? Because at that stage, the gym was my lifeline. I was autistic. I was struggling with being autistic in my field at times. I was struggling with actually being autistic and accepting that I was autistic. And then I found the gym and I found these amazing people. And I could go to work, and regardless of what work was, I could then go to the gym afterwards and actually feel semi-human again. And then all of a sudden that was ripped away. And so the world was shutting down, and yet I was still having to go to work. I was still having to face all my daily challenges. And yet my one regulator that I had found was ripped away from me. And other people are like, oh yeah, but it just closed. You could go for walks and that. And it's like, no, it meant so much more to me than that. And so it was actually really difficult then trying to motivate myself and find ways to keep myself going when I was going to work, coming home, going to work, coming home. And that was my entire life throughout that lockdown. And then it went to the point that I had to be in lockdown, and not because I had been in close contact, how my mind perceived close contact, but because somebody who was in a building that was, quite a few buildings away, and I hadn't walked past, I hadn't seen, I hadn't shared the same immediate area of mine had COVID, I was then further isolated and kept in my house. And then the people contact that I needed, these individuals that helped me through my day, I could no longer access. And I went from going to work to home to just being at home, still not being able to go to the gym, still not being able to see any of my friends, my connections, who actually can help pick me up when I'm feeling really low. And so it started a real spiral of me feeling really bad. It was hard. And as much as I love time on my own, when you're forced to isolate and you are cut off from all things in society that can help give you some focus or some meaning, it becomes really difficult. So for me to get through my day without feeling like I was spiraling into a depression, there were certain people that just seeing them and them knowing how to talk to me would make me feel good. By going to the gym and doing my training made my body feel like it had regulated and felt normal. By actually being able to go to a coffee shop and get a coffee, just the act of being able to walk out of my house was something that I'd worked so long for, and then that was taken away. So then we go back to now, so post-lockdowns. I don't know if I have gone back. I do think I'm still partially living in a lockdown world. I am very isolated. I struggle a lot to leave the house. I do think that increased when I couldn't for so long because I fell out of the habit of doing things. And whereas I had to pair reinforcers, so if I go and do my shopping, I'll get a coffee. I discovered online shopping, so now I don't need to leave the house. Not necessarily a good or healthy thing for me. One of the things I really struggle with now at the shops are people. If they are within that 1.5 metre, I really struggle with that. And there are still signs on the floor and I stand on them, but other people aren't. And so that actually increases my anxiety now when I am going out into these places. So I don't know if I've ever fully gone back to post-lockdown yet. I think it's going to take a very long time. I was running on empty the whole time I was in lockdown. And to get back from running on empty for all that time to kind of being so-called normal again, it's not something I feel I've actually been able to achieve yet. I hope to one day, but I don't know how long it's going to take. It takes us a long time, and that's okay, and I need to accept that. But it doesn't mean it makes things easy. And some days all I want to do is be able to leave my house and be able to go and do something. And yet I'm here going, yeah, but I can't. I really can't leave the house. And that all did actually start with the COVID lockdown.
Really difficult. I think for the better part of 2 years, being able to just not see friends, to have a lot of online communications, to have, a lot of time at home to engage in your special interests and to do the things you enjoy. And then coming out of lockdown where everyone wanted to see you, everyone wanted to go out, there was all of these experiences that you missed. And it was really overwhelming. People were celebrating the end of lockdown and I was having a meltdown because I was so stressed about having to go back out into society. I think it was a lot of that routine was suddenly becoming disrupted when, it was day in, day out the same. I forgot what it was like to go to the shops with another person, what it was like to be able to, go to brunch. It was really, really difficult, and it took quite a few months for me to actually be okay and be comfortable with, hey, this is what it is now. And there are still days where I'm like, I'm still in this kind of post-pandemic, burnout. And I know a lot of autistic individuals had experienced that and are still struggling with it. I'm lucky that a lot of the spaces that I'm in have adjusted. We still offer a lot of Zoom meetings. We can work from home. So it's made that transition easier, knowing that I'm not wanting to go to this meeting because, I've been having a really big couple of weeks that I am really burnt out, that I am really stressed about how to get there. I can just log on and be like, hey, I'm just going to jump on Zoom, and I can do so from the comfort of my own home. So while I think there were a lot of great things that came out of lockdowns in terms of accommodations, it definitely took a really long time to be okay with the transition out of it.
COVID and lockdown. Well, for me, I found the way other people behaved in COVID to be quite challenging. People were very focused on one topic. That sounds ironic for someone who's autistic. But they're literally just really getting focused on the negative side of things. And I found that very exhausting to be around people who, I don't know, just were like stressing all the time. I tend to pull back a fair bit. I enjoyed the brief period of lockdown that we had, and I guess it allowed me an opportunity to stay home more in the future. My transition post-COVID has been quite positive because I started my own business and realized that I didn't have to work in the same way that other people work. I don't function well in an office space, so it's great to work for myself and create my own environment. Yeah, that's it. I don't think this is my final video, but who knows how it will work out. Thanks for picking me.
Right. COVID as a situation was awful, but lockdown was wonderful. Lockdown was the first time in 30-something years that I took time to be at peace, and I took time to realize what was really important to me, and that was my family, my dogs, my study. And so I realized that the 3 hours a day I was spending before COVID driving to work and becoming completely overloaded from a sensory perspective and crying for an hour and a half to get home, that was draining all of my energy. And without that, I was able to do so many things. I was spending time with my husband. I was out in the back garden playing with the dogs. We got a new puppy. We just spent time being authentically autistic. And for all the fear of catching COVID and the challenges that would be associated with that, and the fear of, you know, loved ones overseas and not knowing what was going on with them, that was very present. But I would go back to lockdown, I think, if I could, because it allowed me to find my peace and not have to mask for 3 years. And transition to life back. Okay, so the transition has been bumpy, I'll be honest. So for me, I resisted going back to the office as much as I could. And I've actually quit my job. I was an accountant before. I've now gone back to university full time, and I'm working part-time remotely, doing some work in the mental health space. And so I'm now able to be in my safe space with my squishmallows and my dogs and my stim toys, and just focus on doing a really good job and using my brain the way it's designed to be used, rather than half of my brain going to making other people feel comfortable.
Unpopular opinion, I'm sure, but I loved it. It was so much more quiet. The roads didn't have loads of cars and beeping horns, and there weren't people yelling obscenities out their window at me because I indeed follow the road rules, which we all should do. So for me personally, I liked it. Also the fact that it gave space to social gatherings. People weren't constantly planning things to do on the weekend and inviting you, and I'd have to kind of go through that deliberation in my mind of should I, shouldn't I, like I really want to and the intention is good, but there's a likelihood that I won't have enough spoons that day because of my insomnia, or because I've had a meltdown, or a flare-up of my complex PTSD, or my endo, or the list goes on. And so it gave me a little bit of breathing space from that whole anxiety of do I, don't I, and if I do, then I better prepare scripts just in case I can make it. So yeah, I didn't mind it at all. It gave me quiet time. It was really nice to be able to actually hear the birds outside instead of just cars speeding down the freeway. What's your transition been like back to life after COVID? Oh, interesting. It's been slow, definitely slow. We went from reduced stimuli to the maximum. But I think the biggest transition challenge for me personally was when masks were still mandatory and still are in certain environments. I have a medical exemption from wearing a mask, but I am also immunocompromised, and that was a real challenging dilemma because initially I started wearing the shield, but I would often get weird glances or obscure looks from behind the counter at the supermarket. And in fact, one day a lady approached me directly and said, "Do you know that masks are actually mandatory and you should be wearing it?" Which was really challenging for me because I felt obligated to provide an explanation. I felt obligated to offer for her to see a screenshot of the letter of exemption that my practitioner had written on my phone that I keep handy. When we shouldn't have had to do that in the first place. The state government should have certainly provided some level of identification that we could have done when we went out. So that was a real challenge. The other challenge is that I also have OCD, and again, also being immunocompromised, when I did go out and people became quite slack with wearing their masks, so they would kind of don it under their nose, which meant that I got a bit paranoid that perhaps I was at higher risk. So to be honest, I became a hermit for quite some time. and it took a very slow, gradual progression to leave the house. So yeah, but lockdowns themselves, bring it on. I don't mind the quiet. I know people are going to hate me for that comment, but yeah, we're all different. Thanks.
Being neurodivergent during COVID and lockdowns, firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that my personal experience is probably one of privilege. I'm based in Adelaide, and therefore we sort of escaped some of the more deeper, longer term challenges than the Eastern Seaboard. We weren't locked down for super long periods, and our restrictions were quite flexible. That being said, I can speak from my personal experience of being a neurodivergent during COVID. I had a lot of challenges around my sensory processing limitations. A lot of my sensory processing lies in medical intervention. I've always struggled, even as a child, with medical interventions, things like dentists, doctors, injections, things like that. I also struggle a lot with certain textiles, particularly if they're rubbing or if I'm, burnt out or particularly struggling on certain days. The extra added textile or sensory element of textiles touching my skin can be really challenging. In supporting myself and other autistic individuals, I found that general practitioners were rarely or barely recognizing autism as a disability at the time. It was quite triggering, and I had to do a lot of soul searching in those times to really emotionally regulate around being asked to put my needs as a neurodivergent person to the side for society and for the betterment of society when messaging and science was so inconsistent at the time, and we were all sort of learning. It felt so black and white, and like there was no space for individuality or individual needs, and it resulted in me melting down in doctors' offices. It resulted in me melting down in public spaces, being forced to wear a mask. It was very embarrassing. I have a lot of shame around it, but I've also come to acceptance that it was a shared experience amongst humanity, and I'm certain that a lot of neurodivergent people suffered in bigger ways. So yes, returning to a normal life after COVID, the transition back hasn't been super challenging or jarring. As I said, I'm based in Adelaide, and we didn't have long lockdowns, so it's been, and I'm very grateful for the experience and my personal ability to sort of move through that. I often think of other neurodivergent people in minority groups, or other people that struggle with self-advocacy, and how they would have gone in the times of COVID and lockdowns. It gives me a lot of ability to reflect and just have a lot of gratitude, basically.